Today is the International Day of the Older Person. It's a day where we celebrate the wonderful older people in our lives, the wisdom that they've brought us, the care that they've given us, and the love that they've shared with us. These older Australians are people that are in our lives or possibly have been in our lives. They are people who have brought us wisdom, who've brought us joy. And earlier this week, I sat down with 3 older Australians from diverse backgrounds to hear about their lives and their wisdom for us going forward, particularly in a time of COVID-19 when we've all been particularly impacted by restriction and not being able to visit people. And on that basis, I now share their stories with you. Explain to me the impact that someone who's had life experiences yourself, what's the impact of that, and why does that make that hard to engage today?
Well, at the ripe old age of 76, I had to go through a journey of discovering who I was. I guess, you know, in saying that, everybody is on a journey of discovery through their life. However, when you're dehumanised as a young child of 5 for a continuing period of, say, 14 years, where the systemic abuse of indifference, and it's physical, psychological, emotional and mental abuse, and in the case of my family, my sister and my brother and myself, it escalated further to sexual abuse. You have no sense of self, Craig. You have no sense. I heard it said early on in the piece. Young forgotten Australian Beth from Queensland. She said, "We were nobody's children. We were nobodies. We were given numbers even, and we were never validated or authenticated as a child, or positively reinforced. But it was a dehumanising process. And under the United Nations human rights, they've actually classified us and recognised us as having been tortured. And that's all come from those handful of us that have fought all these years, for 40 odd years, to be validated as, Australians, as, I remember talking to a Supreme Court judge early on in my lobbying and advocacy. And human rights, to take somebody's birthright from them, their identity, is pretty horrendous. And that was the system. And when you look at even the wording of the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, that word responses alludes to one word: indifference. We lived in a sea of indifference. Now, to a young child like me, that manifested in feelings of unworthiness, being unrecognised, unvalidated, unwanted, worse than anyone else, different, unappreciated, unaccepted, all fear-fueled emotions. I lobby and everything, and I can show self-confidence. People say, "Oh, look at Pamella, she's self-confident." But there's a lot of difference between self-confidence and self-esteem. Self-esteem is knowing who you are and liking yourself. and being comfortable in your own skin. And that was denied of so many. And to think that as children, I've got the stamp, which I'll send you a copy of the stamp, that in the children's court, they stamped our files with this big brown stamp, committed to institution. Because we were then committed, so many of us thought that we'd been convicted. We've managed to get the booklet educating people. You know, we're doing life stories at the moment. You know, all the Royal Commissions are sending inquiries. Forgotten Australians, we were the ones that got these things up. The governments and the services would never, and the institutions would never have done that. And to be recognised as being prime movers of this worldwide, because even other countries haven't caught up with us yet. The trauma, that was one question you asked. Trauma is the aftermath of torture. It's the after, and that starts with indifference. And that's not to say that there weren't a handful of staff members that we call sisters that consoled us and commiserated, but very few. And those that showed true Christian charity and compassion didn't last very long, because you towed the line of whoever was leading. And sadly, in our case, there was a brute. The trauma is in how a child responds or reacts, actually. And one way a lot of us, and especially me, and I'll admit this, I suffered addiction. My first addiction was food. As a child, I would restrict and suffer, like I suffered malnutrition when I was in the home, because the food was horrendous, but if I couldn't have what my mum gave me, you know, like the cherry ripe or the custard tart or, you know, Smith's chips or a milkshake, I would restrict. And then, of course, it manifested into overeating. So I joined a 12-step fellowship, and I've got 28 years up clean in food addiction. And then I realised that to deal with the pain, in the early days, I used to use Beck's and Vincent's, and then alcohol became a problem, but not to the point where I became a gutter drunk or anything, but just with the knowledge of who I was and discovering who I was, I realised that I was filling a big empty hole with something that gave me immediate gratification. So I'm 22 years, on the 28th of February, I'll be 22 years clean and sober with alcohol, and 29 years in January from food addiction. So out of the darkness, they say, comes the light.
Very much a theme there of resilience and possibly resistance to, I suppose, to not let the system get you down, but to keep working. And your advocacy has been amazing over the years for forgotten Australians. What advice would you give to young people these days?
Well, I was only talking to my granddaughter. We were talking about snitching. I told her about this show that I was watching and about drugs and how honesty is the first principle in life. Honesty, just be honest. And I said, so would drugs and that sort of thing, do you feel that could be a problem for you, you know? And she said, no. And I said, yes, but just look at a scenario where you're with mates and everything else and they're this and that. And no, she said, I wouldn't. I said, well, the fact is you're sort of towing the line with your sister in not snitching, so that's not being honest, you know? I guess that's a sort of legacy we hope to give to our children and our grandchildren. But the truth is, this little baby that's been born into our family has come into our family to teach us the lessons that we need to learn, because I've always learned my lessons through my children and my grandchildren.
What would you like to see different in the world?
I think just human kindness. And that's a big stretch. But as a forgotten Australian, my dream has always been, right from the beginning, that we're a part of the solution of everything that's not functional within care in Australia. Now that's for disability, for all of our diverse groups, for aged care, for children that are in care. What I'd like to see is, like with this so-called Centre for Excellence with the Royal Commission, I'd like to see it generically rolled out where peer supporters, like with the mental health, if it's about us, don't do it without us. Now, when it comes to aged care, I personally, and I can attest that a lot of forgotten Australians have, excuse my language, shit detectors. So we see these things, we've known these things all along. And one thing we've done is try to educate the broader community so that they know that these things go on. And that is the first step in prevention.
I couldn't agree more, and I think even the theme for this year's International Day of the Older Person is no one left behind. And I think what you're talking about there is, let's not forget forgotten Australians yet again.
Well, for me, in entering into something like this, it sort of establishes, cements us into something that is very important, and to, make known the needs and support that older folk need, as well as, forgotten Australia, because we're an ageing population. And, they're grow old disgracefully. We can be growing old disgracefully. No, just know that those that are suffering, that there are those of us out there that can make a difference and contribute to making life easier. And that's not just for our people. That's for the support people, the staff that are so understaffed. I have a daughter-in-law that's worked in dementia now for 38 years. She's an angel. She has theme days for Valentine's Day. She is just a remarkable person. I have two granddaughters that are in childcare. My youngest son and his wife are in high-level disability care. Don't get me wrong, there are so many wonderful carers out there, but they're not getting the support. They're not, the follow-up, the funding does not focus on the needs, not only of the older folk, but the staff as well. And rest assured, any forgotten Australian, especially out there, and older folk, there are those of us that can lobby, advocate, and look what we've done. We've had Senate inquiries, we've had royal commissions into sexual abuse for children. We can get this right, but we need to be included. And yes, so.
Thank you so much for your time, because that's the commitment we're giving you from OPAN, that we are going to involve you and learn. And every time I speak to you, Pamella, I learn more, but I come away, I've grown. So thank you so much for your time today.
I appreciate that, and all of your efforts and what you put out and the information. It's as I said, I can't use any other word than I am content with that, and I am comforted by that. And to be able to say those things, I've not been able to do that for a long, long time. So thank you, Craig. And thanks to your staff, your wonderful mob. Thanks.